Welcome to our COVID support webinar for hotels and other guest accommodation venues. We appreciate that there's a lot of uncertainty and worry at the moment across a number of business sectors. So our focus during this webinar here today is to offer you support and guidance on what is legally required of you, looking at your COVID-19 workplace risk assessment, outbreak management, and to provide you with information relating to testing sites and vaccinations. We will be providing you with an FAQ document which includes some pre-prepared questions and answers, a link to this presentation, and our email address to keep to hand, especially if you have any questions to ask of us after viewing this webinar, as we'll be happy to help you. Now, which businesses are now allowed to open under Step 4 of the Government Roadmap? All remaining closed and/or restricted businesses are now permitted to open or fully open their premises, including nightclubs, hostess and sexual entertainment venues, and shisha bars. Although COVID is here with us to stay and the infection rates are continuing to increase, government confirmed that at Step 4, most legal restrictions are now lifted. The removal of the following restrictions and changes to guidelines applicable to you are as follows. There will be no need to implement social distancing measures which have previously limited capacity. There is no longer a legal requirement to wear a face covering whilst indoors within the venue. There will no longer be a mandatory requirement to display the NHS QR code poster, nor to collect customer contact details. The mandatory requirement to refuse entry to those who refuse to leave their details has now been removed. The maximum number of group bookings have been removed, including for large events. Table service, table reconfiguration, vertical drinking, and the use of dance floors have also been removed. The government have requested and advised that there must be a gradual approach to the easing of restrictions and for people to take a responsible approach to lifting certain control measures within your venue. Your risk assessment will identify which appropriate mitigations are appropriate to adopt, and you will find as we move on that many mitigations will remain as they were. With time, it is expected that you will take fewer precautions to manage the risks of COVID-19. Now, legal requirements and restrictions that remain. There are restrictions and legal duties that still remain, all of which will assist with the protection and keeping of yourself, your staff, and others safe. And it will, of course, help to prevent the spread of the virus between others. Self-isolation remains a legal requirement, and your duties under health and safety law to protect workers and others from workplace hazards. This is the same with other workplace hazards, where you are required to risk assess and implement adequate control measures to manage that risk. Please remember to incorporate events into your risk assessments, as you'll be dealing with large amounts of people, and please do keep an eye on any announcements with regards to COVID passes. Now, the government has set 6 priority actions to protect yourself, your staff, and customers during coronavirus. Number 1, you must complete a risk assessment. 2, you should provide adequate ventilation. 3, you should clean more often. 4, you should turn away people with COVID-19 symptoms. 5, enable people to check into your venue still. And 6, remember to communicate and train. These 6 priority actions are to make your premises a safer working environment and a safer place for people to visit. This guidance applies to the following venues: hotels, hostels, inns, student accommodation, holiday parks, B&Bs, short-term service accommodation, guest houses, sleeper trains, chalets, caravan parks, and campsites. Now, what is a risk assessment? Broadly speaking, a risk assessment is a careful examination in your work which could cause harm to people and the ways that you can successfully manage these risks to avoid this harm from occurring. As the responsible person, you must conduct a risk assessment to understand how the virus could be transmitted in your premises. You should think about the way that you conduct your work, how your premises is used, and ways that you can protect yourself and members of the public by identifying factors that could result in transmission of the virus. By identifying these hazards, you can then identify sensible measures to control these risks. An example of a hazard would be touch points, such as door handles and taps, cash, and inadequate ventilation to enclosed spaces. These touch points create a risk as the virus could be present on these surfaces. To avoid this risk, touch points should be wiped down frequently and contactless payments, including online bookings, should be encouraged. Staff and volunteers should be trained on the findings of your risk assessments. They should be reviewed and amended as required. Please remember that where there are 5 or more employees, you are required to document the findings of your risk assessment. To assist with the NHS Test and Trace service, you are encouraged to continue to display the NHS QR code poster for your customers to use at their discretion. Every customer or visitor aged 16 and over is encouraged to check into your venue or to provide their details. Many of you will already have a booking system in place. These should be kept securely for a minimum of 21 days to assist the test and trace team. In the case of an outbreak, your records may be requested from the NHS Test and Trace team relating to specific times and dates. You should assist the team as best as you can and provide them with your logbook of customers to assist in tracing those affected. Your venue details will remain confidential during this process. You must also assist the Test and Trace service by keeping a temporary record of your staff shift patterns for 21 days, and if this data is requested, please assist the NHS Test and Trace team. This will help to contain clusters or outbreaks. Please also remember to request that all visitors also check in or leave their details with you, including your local environmental health officer, pest control, and any engineers that attend site. Now, for service of food and drink, keep your front and back of house staff separate, with designated teams and partnering. Have a pick-up point for food and keep exposure to others as minimum as possible. Encourage online ordering and contactless payments through apps where possible. And for room service, request that guests order via telephone or other online means, and that guests collect at the pick-up point, or that delivery is left to the entrance door to guest rooms. Entry to guest rooms should remain prohibited at this time to reduce any unnecessary exposure to others. You should use screens at tills and counters and discourage the use of self-service, such as providing condiments to a table rather than located to areas where customers can collect themselves. Now, face coverings and PPE. Where you are already using PPE in your work activity to protect against non-COVID-19 risks, you should continue to do so. Any use of PPE should be determined by an assessment of risks in the workplace. Workplaces should not encourage the precautionary use of extra PPE to protect against COVID-19 outside clinical settings or when responding to a suspected or confirmed case of COVID-19. Unless you are in a situation where the risk of COVID-19 transmission is high, your risk assessment should reflect the fact that the role of PPE in providing additional protection is extremely limited. However, if your risk assessment does show that PPE is required, you must provide this PPE free of charge, and PPE must be provided and fit properly. It is no longer a legal requirement for staff and customers to wear a face covering. We are now being asked to take a responsible approach. We strongly advise at this time that you ask members of the public to wear a face covering just before they enter, and to also wear one as they move around the premises. For example, when using the toilets. You need to consider the reasonable adjustments needed for staff and members of the public with disabilities. You also need to consider carefully how this fits with other obligations to workers and the public arising from the law on employment rights, health and safety, and also equality legislation. Some people are not able to wear face coverings, and the reason for this may not always be visible to others. Please be mindful and respectful of these circumstances. Be aware that face coverings may make it harder to communicate with people who rely on lip reading, facial expressions, and clear sound. If your workers do choose to wear a face covering, you should support them in using face coverings safely. This means telling them to do the following. They should wash their hands thoroughly with soap and water for 20 seconds, or use hand sanitizer before putting a face covering on, and before and after removing it. When wearing a face covering, workers should avoid touching their face or face covering, as they could contaminate this with germs from their hands. They should change their face covering if it becomes damp or if they have touched it. They should continue to wash their hands regularly, change or wash their face covering daily, and if the material is washable, they should wash in line with the manufacturer's instructions, and if it is not washable, dispose of it carefully into the usual waste stream. Now, hand washing remains a key control measure to prevent the spread of the virus. You should ensure that you have a designated hand wash basin located in convenient locations with a supply of hot and cold running water, liquid soap, and paper towels for hand drying. Hand sanitising stations should be placed at the entrance, toilets, and other key areas throughout the premises. You should request that staff, guests, and visitors use these stations as they enter. Staff should be actively encouraged to wash their hands as often as possible, and reminded that this should be done for at least a minimum of 20 seconds. Staff should also be reminded to wash their hands after taking deliveries and also when handling merchandise. Now, keeping your premises clean. COVID is carried in the air through tiny droplets. Larger droplets can land on surfaces that they touch, while smaller droplets, called aerosols, can stay in the air for at least 5 minutes if there is no ventilation. Therefore, cleaning your premises is a crucial part to achieving compliance and controlling the spread of the virus. You should implement a strict cleaning regime, focusing on touch points such as door handles, taps on all hand wash basins, toilets, shared facilities, card machines, and tables. We strongly recommend that you have a designated housekeeping team who takes sole responsibility for these tasks, and that frequency is high, especially during busy periods. You should continue to use your normal cleaning products that you have been using. However, there is a British product standard available, BS EN 14476, that is recommended, but it is not compulsory. It is only compulsory when you are reacting to an outbreak. The guidance stipulates that you should carry on with your normal everyday disinfectant and sanitizer. Housekeeping staff should focus their time on high-risk areas and be separate to kitchen and reception staff. A rotation system working through touch points is crucial, starting at the reception through to communal areas, corridors, and exit points. When cleaning rooms, wash bags should be provided for your residents to bag their sheets and towels at the end of their stay. Spare sheets and towels can be provided to encourage residents to change as required during their stay. Cleaning products can be provided to encourage self-cleaning, or kindly asking residents to vacate their rooms or accommodation during a specific day and time to allow staff to safely enter, reducing social contact. Shared facilities that are well managed are permitted for use, such as showers, toilets and kitchens. These should be incorporated into enhanced cleaning schedules throughout the day. Please remember to ensure that you have adequate waste provisions for cleaning materials. Now, good ventilation brings fresh or clean air into indoor spaces. The more fresh air that is brought inside, the more diluted any airborne viruses will become. In poorly ventilated spaces, residual virus can remain in the air after an infected person has left and increase the risk of COVID-19 spreading. Many of your premises will be quite large in size, but you may have smaller spaces or rooms that may be used by others which are small in nature and less ventilated. You should maximise the supply of fresh air in your premises, and you can do this through the following: by fully or partially opening windows, air vents and doors to improve natural ventilation. If you use mechanical ventilation, ensuring that your systems are set to maximise fresh air and minimise air recirculation. You should identify any poorly ventilated spaces as part of your risk assessment and taking steps to improve fresh airflow in these areas. The priority for your risk assessment is to identify areas of your workplace that are usually occupied and poorly ventilated. You should prioritise these areas for improvement to reduce the risk of aerosol transmission. The HSE provides guidance on how to identify poorly ventilated spaces. It also explains that you can take the steps that you can take to improve ventilation within these spaces. If you can't improve ventilation in poorly ventilated spaces, then you should consider whether it's safer to restrict the time spent within these spaces and the number of people that have access to these spaces, or stop them from using it. Our Trade with Confidence page contains information regarding the use of CO2 monitors and how CO2 monitors can help to identify poorly ventilated areas. Please take a look at this section on our website for more information. However, just for reference, where there is a continuous talking or singing or high levels of physical activity such as dancing, playing sport or exercising, providing ventilation sufficient to keep CO2 levels below 800 parts per million is recommended. Many of you will hold large events, such as mini festivals and live events, or even weddings or birthday parties. Your risk assessment should look at these carefully with additional control measures. Consider the use of door supervisors and ensure that you have sufficient staff members in place to cope with demand. Implement the NHS COVID pass as a condition of entry, and the government are currently working with organisations where people are likely to be in close proximity to others outside their household to encourage the use of this. If sufficient measures are not taken to limit infection, the government will consider mandating certification in certain venues at a later date. You should encourage LFT testing before arrival and do this via means of online communications. Please do not forget to check conditions on your premises licence to see if a TENS application is needed. Check conditions on the premises licence to make sure that you are fully complying with all requirements, and it would be helpful to the local authority and police to submit your TENS application, if required, as early as possible. If you are running promotions, check they comply with mandatory conditions regarding this area. Implement the use of plastic glasses or more frequent glass collecting. Remember to manage behaviour following alcohol consumption, and please be mindful of minors and preventing the sale of alcohol to those under the age of 18. Now, testing and self-isolation. LFT testing should take place twice weekly. Those who present with symptoms or test positive following an LFT test should isolate and arrange for a PCR test. Now, when do my staff need to self-isolate? if they are symptomatic, and this applies to vaccinated and unvaccinated persons, if positive via an LFT and whilst waiting for a PCR test, again for the vaccinated and unvaccinated, if they receive a positive PCR result, again for the vaccinated and unvaccinated, when in close contact with a positive case, when returning from amber countries, and when returning from red countries, where currently quarantine hotel requirement applies. You have legal responsibilities to ensure compliance with this and must not encourage nor ask someone to work whilst they are required to self-isolate. You as the employer and your employee will be liable for legal action in the form of a fixed penalty notice and/or prosecution for any breaches. Now, there are some proposed new changes, but the government are set to announce what these confirmed changes are. They will do this in due course, so please do keep an eye on the news and our dedicated COVID-19 business page for further details. Now, outbreak management. What is an outbreak? An outbreak is a sudden increase in occurrences of a disease within a location through person-to-person contact or from the environment. If you become aware of 2 or more positive cases of COVID-19 over a 14-day period within your workplace, you should contact Public Health England on telephone number 0344 225 3560. You should press option 0 followed by option 2. You should have a lead point of contact within the business to control and manage such incidents. The lead person should immediately identify any close workplace contacts and advise them to self-isolate. You should not wait for the NHS test and trace team on this. This prompt action will help to reduce the risk of a workplace outbreak. If the local Public Health England team declares an outbreak, you will be asked to do the following: record details of staff with symptoms of COVID-19 and assist with identifying any contacts. You should therefore ensure that all employment records are up to date. You will be provided with information about the outbreak management process, and this will help you to implement control measures, assist with communications to staff, and to reinforce prevention messages. Should you fail to get through to the Public Health England team, please contact our local public health team on the email address provided at the end, where they will be happy to help you. Please also contact Environmental Health COVID Business Support Team for assistance and advice in relation to workplace enhanced cleaning and any additional support that is required. We'll provide you with the guidance to cleaning the workplace for non-clinical settings where there is a suspected or confirmed outbreak of COVID-19. One important thing to continue to implement during such uncertain times is to continue with designating teams and partnering to reduce exposure to others, as mentioned above. Now, managing confirmed or suspected cases of guests. You should have a strict policy in place which covers what to do if there is a case or suspected case of COVID-19. Guests should be made aware of this and their legal obligations to self-isolate. Where guests notify you that they are presenting with COVID-19 symptoms, you must request and accommodate immediate isolation. If this is not possible, guests should be advised to make arrangements for private, not public transport, if they are well enough to do so. Whilst isolating before their test results, guests should be quarantined to their room and use of shared facilities should be prohibited. If a toilet or a shower room is required, then this should be designated for their sole use. Where this is not possible due to the nature of your business, guests should be told that isolation is not possible. Staff will not enter their room to avoid any unnecessary exposure. Where there is a case of a positive test for COVID-19 and the guest is unable to travel home safely, therefore will be required to self-isolate for 10 days, you should discuss practical measures for their stay such as food and drink supplies, reducing staff exposure, asking guests to strip and change beds, and advise them of when they can leave, such as medical assistance and obtaining food supplies. If your facilities are unsuitable for self-isolation by any means, for example where shared facilities are in use, then you should make your guests aware of this before their stay and advise to have private transport in place before their stay commences. Now, other areas for you to consider. Many of you will have other facilities on site, such as gyms and spas. Please take a look at our Trade with Confidence page for advice and specific webinars to assist you with your risk assessments covering these services and workplace activities. There are some groups who are at higher risk of severe illness from COVID-19. Please see the guidance of who is at high risk and protecting people who are clinically extremely vulnerable for further support. You should give extra consideration to people at high risk and to workers facing mental and physical health difficulties. Those who are clinically extremely vulnerable are no longer advised to shield. You should continue to support these workers and your clients by discussing them with their individual needs and supporting them to take any additional precautions advised by their clinicians. Consider providing support for workers around mental health and wellbeing, and we will provide you with a link for further advice via our FAQ document on this. As an employer, you have particular responsibilities towards disabled customers, disabled workers, and workers who are new mothers or who are pregnant. Please carry out an individual risk assessment for their needs. Remember to include breakout and restrooms for staff into your cleaning areas, and restrictions apply that you deem suitable, such as limited capacity, ventilation and cleaning supplies for staff to clean down touch points in between uses. Meetings and trainings should be held via alternative means still, such as via online platforms, and any work-related travel should ideally be done alone, not via car share, or where public transport is used. Please remind your staff members to wear a face covering. If car sharing takes place, advise staff to wear face coverings and to keep the windows open for means of ventilation. The City Council has introduced a COVID compliance grant, which is available to all business sectors, including charities, the voluntary sector, the self-employed, which is to recognise your hard work and to help you with means of operating safely, such as funds for hand sanitizer, cleaning supplies, floor markers and posters, and even contribution, for example, towards ventilation. We've received over 220 applications so far and urge those of you who haven't yet applied to please do so. There are limited funds available and it is on a first come first served basis. We will provide you with the details as to where to apply via our FAQ document afterwards. Businesses with 5 or less employees are entitled to £500 and for those with 6 or more up to £1,000. Once the application has been submitted and accepted by our grants department, an officer within the COVID compliance team will make contact with you to arrange an inspection with you. During this visit, the officer will go through your COVID-19 risk assessment and your control measures. They will offer you any support or guidance where needed. You will be issued with a COVID compliance sticker and your business details will be listed on the council website as a COVID secure premises if you pass all of the requirements. Now, testing and vaccinations. The following few slides show vaccine and testing information, walk-in vaccination centres and test for symptomatic and asymptomatic testing. There is also a slide here with regards to useful guidance links and our email address. Please do make contact with us should you have any questions or concerns, and we will be happy to help you. Thank you for your time and for listening here today. We do wish you all the best for the next stage of the government roadmap. Please remember to be safe and most of all, to be kind to one another,